Hello, everyone. This is Andy Wong. Welcome to the Australian Lifestyle Investment Channel. A few days ago, the RBA, the Reserve Bank of Australia, officially cut interest rates. I believe you have noticed that different news or media have mentioned this news. But what is the performance of the Australian dollar and some related assets in the past few days? And what factors should we pay attention to after that? Welcome everyone to watch our teaching sharing. The teaching content of this episode does not contain any investment advice as in the past, but it does suggest that you remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our video, and introduce it to more friends, especially friends from Hong Kong who are interested in Australia or want to know more about life. You can pay attention to our sharing. Well, actually, on the day of the interest rate cut, we immediately made an unexpected announcement, which was the RBA's interest rate cut. What are the key points that investors need to pay attention to? If you are interested, you can check out the sudden sharing of the day. But is there any relevant news? In fact, in addition to reports from Australia, Hong Kong, and the United States, also mentioned Australia's interest rate cut that day, and the most important reasons mentioned were all important. There is a certain economy, but it is also one that is not too dovish compared to what the market thinks, and an interest rate cut comes. Just because the market thinks it is not an overly dovish interest rate cut, the Australian dollar will move in every situation. Is this picture a trend of the Australian dollar against the US dollar after a slight pullback that day? In fact, the overall trend for the past few days was upward. And what's more, what if everyone starts paying attention to the next trend from mid-January? Sure enough, earlier than we did, we talked about whether AUD will continue to decline in that episode. A similar situation has occurred, that is, after Trump took office. There seem to be several factors that would make the Australian dollar relatively stronger. At least we have seen the Australian dollar in the past month and a half have seen low position before. It has reached 0.61, and even recently it has reached 0.64. I would like to add some technical analysis here, that is, some technical analysis for everyone to pay attention to. Well, if we look at it, of course, for the time being, the trend of the Australian dollar in about half a year is downward. But actually, over the past 2 to 2.5 months, the trend of the Australian dollar has shown what we call a wedge pattern. For those who are into short-term trading, it might be a bit tricky to handle, because it keeps making what looks like false breakouts, then reverses direction. After a breakout, it turns out to be a false breakout, and then it goes back the other way. All in all, when we see this horn shape, we usually regard it as a turning signal, close to the midline. Let's see if it is possible. After a period of decline, there will be a more obvious trend. A chart of AUD versus USD over 3 years shows AUD dropped from 0.74 to 0.76 since mid-January. As discussed earlier, a similar decline trend emerged. And the recent rebound wave has also rebounded to the point where we can see that one of the previous supports since 22 years ago is the red line. So usually, when we look at the technical trend, these previous supports have fallen below. It will become a resistance in the future. So maybe the value is not too high on a short-term basis. But we have to pay attention here, just like we did before, whether the AUD will continue to fall. During the sharing, I found that from some midline angles, the Australian dollar is actually starting to become more and more attractive. Could it be that this has become some midline opportunities? You can pay attention to that episode. One have shared some of the things I have followed up with you. At this moment, they are still valid and useful, so you can spend some time to pay attention to them. After discussing the Australian dollar, we definitely need to look at the situation in the Australian stock market. This is a 6-month chart of the ASX 200 index. Overall, we can say that since the end of last week, the Australian stock market has started to decline, And now, the long-anticipated rate cut cycle has officially begun. This could be good news for the market because ever since the RBA officially announced the rate cut, the stock market has been on a downward trend, dropping day by day. After the rate cut, the stock market has been on a downward trend, with a bearish candle every day. Overall, from the historical peak a week ago, it has dropped about 3.7% at its lowest. That's not a huge drop really, because if you look back over the past 6 months, a decline of about 3 to 5% is actually quite common. You don't need to scare yourself. As I've shared with you before, the rate cut might bring some short-term volatility to the stock market, but I believe that in the midterm, the overall situation will be positive, unless we accidentally step into a recession scenario. But for now, it doesn't seem like that's the case. Of course, in the short term, different sectors will be affected differently. For example, traditionally, people think that the financial sector might benefit from a rate cut. It may be a good thing. We would like to use one of the Australian financial sector ETFs as an example this time. It is true that this ETF one is definitely the best, and it does not mean that the holdings in it are not. It doesn't mean it's good or bad, but I just want to borrow it here for everyone to take a look. It turns out that the past week was like the financial sector, and it may be because there was some good news about shipments that borrowed the value of individual stocks. The performance of those stock prices has lagged behind the market overall. In fact, from the highs of the last 2 weeks until now, it has dropped about 8.1%, while the overall market has only fallen about 3% during the same period. The Australian financial sector has really been underperforming lately. You might want to keep an eye on whether this is due to its relatively high valuations and the impact of the recent earnings season. If you're interested in getting more updates about the Australian stock market, just let me know. You can PM me or comment, and I'll have the chance to follow up with you here. On the other hand, everyone will see this when looking at this picture. On the contrary, after the interest rate cut, it was relatively stable and followed the decline of the market. This sector is just like the teaching point shared with you in the last 2 episodes. Let me share. Let's talk about one of the ETFs of Australian Real Estate Trust. I'm just borrowing this ETF here to show you the recent performance. I am not here to say whether the other ETF is better or not. Maybe my colleagues in my company will have heard me share this. But publicly I said this is just a reference for everyone to pay attention to. But at least I see that, under the public economy and the interest rate cut, maybe the market feels that they are attracted to REITs. Moreover, in addition to the stocks we talk about every day, bonds are actually a comparison, and they may be an asset that will benefit during this period. This time, I used one of the bond-related ETFs listed in Australia as an example to give everyone a look at these trading days during this period. They are doing better in these trading days. I am here. Oh, just to add something, if you have been paying attention to my sharing with the media in Hong Kong. Or I often share on different YouTube channels, and you might have heard me mention that bonds are definitely worth paying more attention to during this time. Anyway, if you're interested in learning more, just let me know. You're welcome to reach out to me anytime.
Hey everyone, I'm Andy Wong. I'm one of the few people here in Australia and Hong Kong who is licensed or qualified to help local clients and companies with diversified investments, like my years of experience with US stocks, Australian stocks, SMSFs, ETFs, and so on. I hope to share my investment and life experiences with the Chinese community in Australia and Hong Kong through this YouTube channel. If you're interested in having a one-on-one chat with me, you can book a time through the link below the video or in the channel's content. Schedule a time with me.
And I believe that many friends who live in Australia or some overseas investors are very familiar with or very nervous about one of the sectors in Australia, which is about real estate, and it happened this week. Actually, what's the news about Australian real estate? There are two things. First of all, I talked about a piece of news that relatively few YouTubers talk about, which is the news that Domain has made an acquisition for this American real estate company, which is the cost of the United States. This news is noteworthy because it might have some underlying implications. On that day, Domain's stock price rose by 40%, while its competitor, realestate.com, dropped by 11%. Stay tuned for more updates. In other Australian real estate news, the market remains strong. Discussions on overseas investors and some temporary residents being restricted from buying properties. This may remind of elections. Currently, real estate data shows no major short-term fluctuations, but these updates are worth watching. A little, because of that, real estate is considered to be in a similar situation, and it is said that some overseas investors and even some TRs are actually not able to buy some ready-made buildings. But this news is very important, even if everyone may think about the situation of the general election. These scenarios are coming. Isn't that enough? The current real estate data is like this, and there won't be much fluctuation in the short term, but at least this is news that I think everyone needs to pay attention to, especially regarding the different asset classes we mentioned earlier. Whether you're looking at the Australian dollar, your Australian stocks, or possibly some Australian real estate, you need to pay attention to the changes in sentiment over the past few days. However, from a long-term or mid-term perspective, I think it's crucial to keep an eye on at least three key points, like the political parties. After the second quarter, will there be any changes in the political parties? Right now, we're talking about some competitive policies that seem more like slogans aimed at winning votes. Or will they actually implement real policy changes after the second quarter? These are things everyone needs to keep an eye on. Plus, there will definitely be significant changes in the macroeconomic environment. Whether the unknown number is necessarily negative is not necessarily negative, but it may also suddenly become positive. So in fact, we must follow different news to see if there are some different assets, and sometimes we need to make some adjustments. And what's more, the RBA's statement on interest rates and trends is relatively conservative. Will the trend of interest rates suddenly change in response to changes in the economy or other reasons? Under these circumstances, in addition to paying attention to myself, of course, I will try to follow up with everyone here. Just like the many different factors mentioned at the beginning, it turns out that there is some news. In fact, we can predict in advance what assets may benefit or be affected in the future. I will also try. This channel, there are a lot of different pedagogical sharings in it. In addition to investment, of course, there are also a lot of little knowledge about life in Australia that I want to continue to share with you. Everyone's investment portfolio may be suitable. Everyone's needs can be a bit different, so if you really need to make some decisions and you're looking for more professional advice, I highly encourage you to reach out to some truly professional friends for a bit of guidance. Alright, that's it for today's educational sharing. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks for your support. Remember to leave a comment, give a thumbs up, and share. Our teaching share doesn't include any investment advice. So, before you make any decisions, remember to consult the relevant licensed professionals for advice. Thanks a lot.